trying to speed up in the car. Roll! Oh, Jesus!
It was a Tuesday night in East Birmingham, and on a stretch of parking lot on Gallant Drive, something was already in motion that nobody was going to be able to stop. There was a fight. Two young women, a crowd of people gathered around them, and somewhere in that crowd, someone had already made a decision. The fight moved from the parking lot into the breezeway of one of the apartment buildings, and then, for just a moment, it seemed like it might be over. It wasn't. Because what happened next wasn't a reaction. It wasn't a moment of rage. Investigators would later say it looked nothing like a spontaneous act of violence. The breezeways were blocked, people were corralled, multiple shooters opened fire from different directions at the same time. 168 rounds in a residential parking lot where families lived, where children slept. When the shooting stopped, one woman was dead. A man who tried to pull her to safety had been shot, and would later describe, in disturbing detail, exactly where that bullet entered his body and where it came out the other side. And a 4-year-old little girl who had just started pre-K that week had lost the last parent she had left in the world. But here's what made investigators stop cold. This didn't start as a murder, it started as a dispute over a man. And what they would uncover about how it ended, about who made those calls, who showed up with those weapons, and who was still making plans from behind bars more than a year later, was far more calculated than anyone standing in that parking lot could have imagined. You're watching morbid true crimes, psychological true crime documentaries. Like, subscribe, and share for in-depth stories that uncover the mind behind the crime.
Got my forces on. I got my forces on. I'm finna bob and weave out here with a big ass bitch with her feet. I just want to know why she's so nervous. Fuck what my man saying. Yeah, and my nigga say I'm perfect. Driana.
It ain't my fault that I put belly
Driana,
so big.
you got herpes, man. You need to come on. You need to reveal yourself. Driana. Janaya. Driana and Janaya. Where y'all at, man? I'm out here. You bitches said y'all was looking for me. Here I go. Yeah, here I go. Let's see. Yeah.
Man, get this phone. You need to start doing it, boy.
Here I go. Shout out, here I go. I'm ready to get us some coochie. I'm ready to get us some coochie. Boochie. See, I'm gonna pull up and rescue. Hey, can you pull up and rescue us? Hey, you done found your sister in that black.
Asia Alyce Poole was 21 years old. She was a mother first. That's the thing everyone who knew her came back to. Her 4-year-old daughter was everything. Her best friend, speaking through grief just 2 days after Asia was killed, described her in the simplest and most complete terms imaginable. Mama was nice. Mama was sweet. Mama was Mama. That was Asia. She had no criminal record, no history of violence. She was a young woman in her early 20s, living in East Birmingham, raising a little girl mostly on her own, and doing it in a place that was, by every account from residents who lived there, not safe. The summer of 2024 had already been brutal for her. The father of her daughter, also just 21, had died on July 26, unexpectedly, and Asia was still carrying that loss when August arrived. Her daughter had just started pre-K. Asia had just enrolled her. A new beginning for both of them, in the middle of grief. But there was something else happening that summer that Asia couldn't fully step away from. A conflict. An ongoing dispute with another young woman named Jania Hendricks. It had been building for a while, and at the center of it, something that, in hindsight, feels almost too small to hold the weight of what it became, was a man they both had feelings for. People close to Asia knew about the tension, but no one, not her best friend, not her family, believed it would ever reach the point it did. The drama is very small, her best friend would say later. It's literally so little.
So little. Somebody mad about somebody. This ain't theirs. Can't get mad at somebody this ain't choice.
The Monarch Ridge apartments sit on the 2900 block of Gallant Drive in East Birmingham, Alabama. Most people outside the neighborhood didn't know the name, but inside the city it carried a reputation. multiple homicides over the years, ongoing complaints from residents about safety, a property that the city of Birmingham had flagged as a public nuisance, not recently, but as far back as 2021. 3 years before Asia Poole was killed, the city's Office of the City Attorney had filed a public nuisance lawsuit against the complex, then known as Valley Brook Apartments. A settlement was eventually reached. The complex agreed to specific security requirements, cameras, lighting, and, critically, a direct connection between those cameras and the Birmingham Police Department's real-time crime center. That agreement was signed. That agreement was in effect. And on the night of August 20th, 2024, those cameras were not connected to the real-time crime center. That detail matters. And we'll come back to it. For the people who lived at Monarch Ridge, the environment was something they described in consistent terms. Confrontations could happen fast. Parking lots and breezeways were places where things escalated. Residents said you learned to move carefully, watch your surroundings, and stay inside when things felt tense. Asia Poole was raising her daughter inside all of that, and in the weeks leading up to August 20th, her life on the surface was continuing. The loss of her daughter's father was fresh. Pre-K had just started. There were no documented threats against her, no reports filed, nothing in the official record suggesting what was coming. But the conflict with Janiyah Hendricks hadn't gone away. It was still there, simmering. And on a Tuesday night in late August, it finally came to a head. August 20th, 2024. A Tuesday. That evening, Asia Poole was at Monarch Ridge. Her best friend, Demarion Rankins, was with her. The parking lot was busy. People were outside. Asia had gone live on Facebook earlier that night. The camera was on. The world was watching. In the casual, scrolling way, the world watches things on social media, not knowing yet that they were watching the last hours of someone's life. Around 10 o'clock, Janiyah Hendricks arrived. And with her arrival, the tension that had been building for weeks became something physical. The two women fought. In the parking lot near Asia's car. It was a real fight, visible, witnessed by dozens of people who had gathered or were already outside. Estimates later put the crowd at roughly 50 people in and around the parking lot and breezeways. The fight moved from the parking lot into a breezeway, and then, at some point, it appeared to break up. Witnesses said it looked like things were winding down. Demarion Rankins would later say that's what he thought too, that it was over. It wasn't over, because somewhere in that crowd, or arriving at that moment, were people who hadn't come to watch a fight. They had come for something else entirely. The shots came without warning, and they didn't stop. 168 rounds. That's not a number that happens in a moment of rage. That's not one person pulling a trigger until they run out of bullets. That number means multiple weapons, multiple shooters, coordinated fire from multiple positions. Witnesses described what they saw. Breezeways blocked off. People herded together. Shooters positioned at different angles. One resident who was there that night said it to investigators plainly. The people who came with the guns came prepared. They had everything set up. Nobody was getting out easily. Asia Poole and Demarion Rankins hit the ground when the first shots rang out. Rankins picked her up. They tried to make it to the breezeway for cover. Then the shooting came from a second direction, then a third.
Call the police department! No! All right, you.
I can't take it. Come back here with me, bro.
Where's my sister, bro?
They get my sister.
What's up? What's up?
Come on, we gotta take it. I can't take it.
Inside the apartment complex, residents who had been in their units when the shooting started were now on the floors of their homes. One woman, who had stepped out for a quick errand just 3 minutes before the shooting began, came back to find bullets had come through her apartment wall and shattered a glass table inside. 3 minutes. That's all that had separated her from being in that room. There were 2 nurses among the people at the scene that night. Coincidence. They went to Asia Poole and checked for a pulse. They didn't find one. At 10:31 p.m., Birmingham firefighters pronounced Asia Alyce Poole dead at the scene. Demarion Rankins was transported to UAB hospital, shot. The nature of his wound, where the bullet entered his body and where it exited, was something he described in full when he gave his first interview 2 days later. He showed up to that interview on crutches. And in the chaos of those first minutes after the shooting stopped, while sirens were approaching and people were screaming, one person made a very specific decision. Janiyah Hendricks walked to Asia Poole's car. The engine was still running. She got in and she drove away. That too was caught on video.
No, she finna pull off in her car. She finna pull off in her car. No! They just took that girl's car!
When Birmingham police arrived at Monarch Ridge, they found a scene unlike most they had processed before. Evidence markers spread across the parking lot, the breezeways, struck vehicles, damaged apartment units. The count of spent casings alone told a story of sustained, coordinated gunfire. This wasn't a drive-by. This wasn't a single altercation that went wrong. And then investigators discovered the camera problem. The cameras at Monarch Ridge, the ones required by the 2021 settlement agreement to be directly connected to BPD's real-time crime center, were not connected. Police Chief Scott Thurmond acknowledged it publicly and directly. The agreement had been in place for 3 years. The cameras were there. The connection wasn't. Which meant that in the critical first hours of investigating a multi-shooter homicide at a residential complex, detectives were working without the real-time footage infrastructure they were supposed to have. What they did have, though, and this turned out to be significant, was Facebook Live. The fight had been streamed. The shooting had been captured on multiple phones. And in the hours after the incident, footage began surfacing on social media that showed the altercation, the crowd, and the moments just before and after the gunfire began. Police officer Truman Fitzgerald would later confirm that social media footage played a, quote, major role in the investigation. Tips from the public began coming in. Mountain Brook Police Department provided assistance. The U.S. Marshals were put on notice. Mayor Randall Woodfin made the city's position clear. Turn yourself in or be found. And then, investigators started looking very carefully at the people who had been there that night, who had started the fight, who had fled the scene, and, most importantly, who had made the call to bring armed people to a residential parking lot. Janiyah Hendricks had already drawn attention before the investigation formally began. She had fought Asia Poole. She had left the scene in Asia Poole's car, and she was the sister of a 20-year-old man named Justin Jamond Hendricks. That connection between the woman in the fight and her brother became one of the first threads investigators pulled. Because the question investigators were trying to answer wasn't just who fired the shots. It was who organized this, who made the call, who, after a fight broke out between 2 young women in a parking lot, arranged for multiple armed people to show up, take positions, and open fire. That level of coordination doesn't happen spontaneously. Somebody reached out. Somebody gave a location. Somebody said, come here now, bring what you have. And the footage, the witness accounts, and the digital trail investigators were assembling were all starting to point in the same direction. In the parking lot footage and in witness statements, another name emerged alongside Hendricks. Taylor Towan McLeod, 22, of Fairfield. McLeod and Hendricks were both being identified in connection with the shooting itself, not just with being present, but with actively firing. A 4th person surfaced in the investigation, Akoria Danae Woods, 20. Her alleged conduct went beyond the parking lot. She was connected to shots fired into occupied apartment units. 2 families had bullets come through their walls that night. That wasn't collateral. That was part of the scene. And there was a 5th person, a 17-year-old juvenile, whose name could not be released, under Alabama law. Old enough to be charged with murder, young enough that the state protected his identity. 5 people, coordinated, armed, at a residential apartment complex, over a dispute between 2 women about a man. But investigators were beginning to suspect the picture was even bigger than that. The Facebook Live footage was the foundation, but it wasn't the only thing. As investigators reviewed the social media videos frame by frame, cross-referenced with witness accounts and phone records, and tracked the movements of individuals connected to the scene, a clearer picture began forming of exactly what happened, and in what order. Janiyah Hendricks' theft of Asia's car was documented on camera and confirmed by multiple witnesses. She was picked up on that charge, but the bigger arrest was coming. And then, something else surfaced in the court documents, something that expanded the scope of what investigators were looking at in ways that went beyond August 20th entirely. Records revealed that on the same day as Asia Poole's murder, earlier that same morning, in the early hours of August 20th, there had been another shooting in eastern Birmingham, an unrelated incident. Gunfire striking a residence and an SUV around 2 a.m., no injuries reported. Justin Hendricks was named as a co-conspirator in connection with that incident as well. The alleged orchestrator was a man incarcerated at Holman Correctional Facility, someone coordinating violence from behind bars. 2 shootings, same day, same name, connected to both. And that raised a question that investigators couldn't ignore. Was Justin Hendricks not just a participant in what happened to Asia Poole, but someone already embedded in a pattern of coordinated, directed violence? The answer to that question would become clearer over the next year. Here's what the investigation established. Janiyah Hendricks and Asia Poole had been in an ongoing dispute over a shared romantic interest. That night, it turned physical. In the parking lot of Monarch Ridge, in front of dozens of people. At some point during or after that fight, investigators believe a call was made. Justin Hendricks, Janiyah's older brother, was contacted. And what happened next was not a brother rushing over in a panic. What arrived at Monarch Ridge was organized. Multiple people, multiple weapons, including firearms equipped with switches that dramatically increase rate of fire. Positions taken at multiple entry points, breezeways blocked. 168 rounds fired. This was not a crime of passion in the traditional sense. Passion may have been the trigger. But what followed looked, by every piece of evidence investigators assembled, like a planned execution that happened to be triggered by a parking lot fight. Asia Poole was killed. Demarion Rankins, her best friend, the man who tried to get her to safety, was shot and survived. He would later sit in front of a camera, on crutches, and say, "My friend really lost her life to bull. My friend is gone." The drama is very small. It's literally so little. He said that, and he was right. Whatever the conflict between Asia and Janiyah had been, whatever the argument, whatever the tension over a shared love interest, it was small. It was the kind of conflict that plays out between young people every day, in every city, and ends with hurt feelings and distance. Not 168 bullets. The arrests came quickly. Justin Jamon Hendricks, 20, was taken into custody by the Birmingham Police Department SWAT team. He was charged with murder in the first degree and attempted murder. No bond. Taylor Tawan McLeod, 22, of Fairfield, was arrested by an outside agency. Same charges. No bond. Janiyah Hendricks was charged with first-degree theft of property for taking Asia's car from the scene. Bond set at $30,000. Akoria Danae Woods, 20, was charged with murder, attempted murder, and 2 counts of discharging a firearm into an occupied dwelling or vehicle. Bond set at $120,000. A 17-year-old juvenile, unnamed, protected under Alabama law, was charged with murder and held without bond in the Jefferson County Jail. 5 arrests. Multiple weapons charges. A multi-agency takedown of a coordinated group that had opened fire in a residential complex. But Justin Hendricks wasn't done making news. From inside jail while awaiting trial, investigators alleged he was still orchestrating violence. In September 2025, more than a year after Asia Poole's death, a grand jury indicted Hendricks on additional charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into cars, and most chillingly, coordinating a murder-for-hire scheme from his jail cell. The man charged with killing Asia Poole was allegedly still trying to have people killed from behind bars. As of March 2026, no trial verdict has been issued in the murder of Asia Alyce Poole. Justin Hendricks, Taylor McLeod, Akoraya Woods, Janiyah Hendricks, and the unnamed juvenile all remain charged. The cases are active in the Jefferson County court system. Defense attorneys have signaled they intend to challenge the evidence, including questions about how many shooters fired how many rounds and exactly whose bullet struck Asia Poole. Justin Hendricks' attorney noted publicly that with 168 rounds fired, there was obviously a lot of shooting going on, and that establishing precise individual culpability would be part of the legal argument. The prosecution has the Facebook Live footage, it has witness testimony, it has ballistic evidence from a scene documented in extraordinary detail, it has a pattern of behavior documented across multiple incidents on the same day, and it has the subsequent grand jury indictment showing a defendant who, even from jail, was allegedly still trying to coordinate violence. The legal process continues. Asia Poole's family waits. The shooting changed things at Monarch Ridge, or at least it forced the city to enforce what had already been promised. In January 2025, a new settlement agreement was reached between the city of Birmingham and the property ownership. This time, the requirements were specific and enforceable. A staffed security gate, license plate readers, vehicle decals for residents, and, finally, cameras directly connected to the BPD Real-Time Crime Center. The requirement that had existed since 2021, ignored for 3 years, was now being enforced. 4 years later, one homicide later. For residents who had lived through that night, the trauma didn't end when the shooting stopped. One resident described how even weeks later, unexpected noises would send people to the floor. Doors opening too fast. A car backfiring. Everyone on edge. "Nobody has been able to rest," she said. We're tired. Asia Poole's best friend, Demarion Rankins, the man who was shot alongside her, who tried to carry her to safety, gave one interview. He came on crutches. He talked about her daughter. He talked about how small the drama was. He talked about how gone she was. And then he stopped talking publicly. Because what is there to say, really? His best friend was 21 years old. She was a mother. She was raising a little girl alone in a difficult place. She got into a fight that she didn't start. A fight over something small. And people arrived with automatic weapons. And her 4-year-old daughter, who had just started pre-K the week her mother died, became an orphan before she was old enough to understand what that word means. Thank you for watching Morbid True Crimes. If this story made you think, consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it. Because understanding the crime is how we prevent the next one. For Asia Poole's daughter, who will one day be old enough to search her mother's name, the record will always be there. The footage, the court filings, the 168 rounds, and the fact that all of it started with something her mother's best friend described as, literally, so little.
We continue our team coverage of the shooting. Our Josh Gant, Lauren Harkson, and Brady Talbert joining us live after talking with witnesses and people who survived the shooting.
Josh, we'll start with you. You spoke to one of those victims who says he's just thankful he survived.
Yeah, Jim, Gabriel Islami says he is very blessed to see today after being shot. You know, this was his first time at this club. He was standing outside with his friends waiting to get in when he says bullets started flying out of nowhere.
Standing there talking, and all of a sudden you just hear rapid fire full auto gunshots just ring out.
Gabriel Islami describing the chaotic moments on Birmingham's South Side Saturday. The 24-year-old was waiting in line with friends for a high school reunion at Hush when he heard gunshots.
As I'm running, all of a sudden I couldn't feel my leg anymore. And I just dropped. And it didn't even dawn on me that I had gotten shot. I turn around and kind of look back, and there's people laid out all over the sidewalk, and there's gun smoke in the air too. It's almost like a horror movie. There's bodies with smoke in the air. It's something literally out of a horror movie.
Islami says a bullet went through his butt and came out his inner thigh, narrowly missing vital arteries. His friend, who was also grazed by a bullet, came to his side and rushed him to UAB.
And by the grace of God, it missed everything. No artery, no blood vessels, no bone. But I was told it was millimeters away from hitting my artery. The biggest fear in the world, anyone's biggest fear, is leaving.
His dad, Mo, was waiting outside UAB. He says as the crowd was growing, seen in these videos, everyone was anxiously waiting to find out about their loved ones.
It's the worst feeling in the world. Not knowing if I'm going to see my son again.
Islami described the bloody scene as he made his way to see his son, images he can't get out of his head.
As I walked through the trauma unit, there was bed after bed after bed of young people, blood everywhere, and the worst part of it was not knowing who's going to make it, who's not going to make it.
Big relief when he saw his son, knowing things for them could have been a lot worse.
Of course, you know, no parent wants to bury their child, you know. So I mean, it's got to stop, man. If people have issues with each other, there's other ways besides resorting to violence and ruining your life as well as ending another's in the process.
Really echoing there what his son says. He says something has to give when it comes to this gun violence. I'm joined now by our Brady Talbert, picks up our team coverage after hearing from local leaders about all of this. The mayor really fed up with it.
Yeah, a lot of emotions today. I can tell you that. The mayor vented his frustration about all this gun violence that we've seen in the Magic City recently, in particular criticizing the way politics is playing into public safety.
I really don't care. I don't give a damn about partisan. I don't care about Democratic politics, Republican politics. What is my top priority, along with the Birmingham Police Department, is public safety.
Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin calling on both state and federal lawmakers for gun reform. In 2022, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed the permitless carry law, which allows people to carry a concealed gun without a license. The mayor says this is part of the problem.
You see, we are prepared to be overly aggressive, dogmatic, if you will, and go after every shooter in the city. But as it stands, they can ride around with no permit. There's a certain element in this city, there's a certain element in this community who are too comfortable riding around with semi-automatic weapons, automatic weapons, convergent switches, and everything else.
Woodfin asked members of Congress to reinstate a measure similar to the assault weapons ban signed by President Clinton in the 90s. It was lifted in 2004.
Our country, and not just our country, but the city of Birmingham, in that 10-year window, saw the lowest form of gun violence. We don't have any interest in this whole debate about Second Amendment rights. We don't have any interest in people who want to protect their homes, militia, whatever else you want to say.
And while there has been no movement on the federal level, we could see some changes here on the state level in regards to Glock switches. Those devices can convert a pistol into a fully automatic weapon. We're going to have more on that angle coming up for you at 9:30 and 10. Your reporter in Birmingham, I'm Brady Talbert, WBRC 6 News on your side.
Thanks.